Hello, welcome to my studio. Today's Tuesday tip is all about art. Let's get right in it.
Without really meaning to, I started this little series called Brushing the Blank. And first I did brushing the sky, and then my next tip was brushing the ground, and it was all about grass. Today is brushing the bark. I'm going to show you some ways to paint trees, but okay, first reference photo, super simple. We're starting out easy. This is a tree that is straight on, and it's a pretty typical tree. If you've looked at little kid paintings, we have the basics of what a kid would paint, right? We've got some grass, we've got bark, we've got the leaves overhead. To take it a step further, to make it a little bit more realistic and get out of those early developmental stages of drawing or painting a tree, I want to draw your attention here. It is not just a smooth, straight line just going up. Some trees do grow like that, but for this reference photo, we can clearly see that there are really thick roots that come up and make a curve. And if you can tell here, there is some depth and dimension to this tree because this root right here comes all the way up, and it's almost like a thick vein. I say a vein only because the shadowing right here makes it appear as if there is a thick bit right here. Now with shadowing right here, gives the impression that there's another thick area right here. It goes out like this and then down. How you would do this wouldn't just make loops like this and then paint up. No, you would get your color started. So you'd start with the darkest color. You would just kind of do a wash of probably this color right here of the whole thing, and then you would dab in these lighter spots, because it's not so much that you're making a line, and there is a time and place for that, to make a line and then you fill in the darkest color and then start adding these lighter bits, because you can see right here, if we look really closely, there is a highlight. It's really faint because a highlight doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be stark white like this is right here. Highlight right here. This is a highlight. This is a highlight. And pay attention also to the color here. There's not just this grayish bark. There is a shade of really, really light brown here. It's greenish down where there is grass. There's some slate grays right here, right there, right there, right here. And then, so a slate gray is kind of more like a bluish gray. So when you're mixing it, it might not look right. You might think, oh, well, slate gray, this looks a little blue. This doesn't look right on a tree. But once you start putting it in these little places, you'll see that it actually ends up working. Just like in my last tutorial about grass, there were some bits of grass that with the light shining on it actually looked turquoise. Now as we continue analyzing this tree, you can see there's some knotty bits here. And again, to do the knotty bits, you would be strategic about where you would add your highlights. So we already have our base color and we're adding our highlights. You would add a little bit here, and I would use a soft wet brush and just kind of put it like this, a little bit right here. And then with a dry brush that's a bit thicker, a bit rounded, I would just kind of poke some colors on to finish up those highlights, to add depth and a little bit of realism. Now, as we scoot out of this tree a little bit and we're zooming out and analyzing it, you can see that there are branches visible even in the leaf spots. A lot of trees, you do actually see those. So you wouldn't just have straight bark coming up and then from here up just have green. You can even see here where light is coming through. And obviously the background is white, so it gives the impression that there are peekaboo spots here. That is another thing to add to your portrait to make it look even more realistic, is to add these little highlight spots. I would assume that this green right here is our darkest green, and that's what we would start with. And you would get a wide, thick brush, and then you would dab. So it's not so much that you are going in and you are literally stroking every single leaf. It gives you that impression of a leaf stroke by having a dry brush that you're dabbing lightly to get your basic. And just how I showed you with painting grass and getting this layer, you can see here how there's almost like a line here and a line here, because it's darker right here and lighter right here. It gives the illusion that there's like a line that adds depth to your painting so it doesn't look flat. This highlight spot of this tree is going to be these really light bits right here. When we zoom in, you can see they almost look turquoisey, just like the grass did. And then we've got these yellows. Now, using this as a reference photo, this is a tree that obviously has color other than green. And you can clearly see that there are branches. So you can have fun with it. A branch just isn't a straight line necessarily. You can see here that there's one branch that goes up like this and boop, comes right down. And there's another one right here that just goes up and then shoots back down. And just like the last reference photo, you can see how there's bits of the sky poking through the tree. That is something that would show realism. That you see it, you look at this and you think, oh, this is super realistic. But if you don't have the tools necessary to analyze, why does this look realistic? It's got these key elements. It's got knots down at the bottom that represent the roots. You see branches that are going along the inside, and they're not outside. You can see the depth because the branches could have been, this is a picture, but if you were to paint this, you would add the branches and then paint. And if you ended up painting a little too much, go back in and repaint a branch and then go in and add some more leaves on it. Okay, we're going to analyze this, and it's a little bit more complicated than the last ones. We started with just a tree, and then it was a tree with some foreground with grass and sky. Now this has multiple trees, and quite literally you use the same advice for the first tree for one of these, and then you just repeat it, and that would make a row. Okay, but as you can see, there's trees in the back, but you don't see all the way to the bottom of those trees. You just see the tops. That does not mean that you paint your row, your 4 trees first. I mean 4 F-O-R-E, the foreground, not the background. Always start with your background. Go in, and I would do a really light gray right around here to do color blocking, and then do the darkest that's right here that isn't a black, because right here looks black. We wouldn't start with black, that's a little too stark. Start with one of these greens right here. one of these greens that's really, really dark. Because as you add the highlights, it's going to give the illusion of the leaves without having to go in and literally paint every single leaf. Doing a color block out and then lighter green over here, not as dark. So you would still do the darkest shade first, but it's not as dark as this is. So this would be about this, which looks like maybe a phthalo green with a tiny bit of shading to it. So just the tiniest bit of either a really, really dark blue, or you can shade it with a black. So you'd get a pencil and you would kind of make some rough draws of where you're going to have your trees. Have an idea of where your trees are going to be poking out. And then as you go in and add the light, so you have your darkest color, and then you build up with your second darkest color until you get to your lightest colors. And there's 3 different colors that I'm seeing just right off the bat that are what would be in the realm of the lighter colors. Those would be the highlighting colors. There's a really, really light green here. There's almost a hint of a brown in some places. It's like a greenish brown. And then there's a really light green. Not this white green, but a lighter green right here. Right here would be an example of that really light brownish green right here. Using the same techniques as from the first reference photo, you've got your color blocking, you have an outline of where you want your trees to go, you know that there's a foreground and a background, and that this tree in particular, that tree is in the very back. You can see from this photo that these are the trees that are in the farthest away from the front few trees. You can also tell by looking at this photo that the light source is coming from this angle. So as you're adding your lighting colors, you've built up your darkers. You've started with the color blocking of your darkest shade, not the black, but the darkest green, and then you add your darker greens. And then once you start getting to your highlighting colors, those 3 light greens, you would put them in a way right here on this side of the tree, because that is what shows you that the light source is coming from this direction. See that, how it's darker over here, and you can tell that this bush is out like this because right here is shaded. See that? That tells you that this is sticking up out, and that gives depth. Shading and highlighting adds depth to your painting. Okay, we're getting even more complicated here, because you can see here that the angle is from down low. So avoid the compulsion to just paint straight up. Like your angle is down here and you're looking up and just painting straight up, because you can see that these trees aren't necessarily growing on a hill and that's why they look the way that they do. No, that's the perspective of being low and looking up, that they are at an angle and they are all matching in the angle. It might be a little odd to have one that's going this way and then one going that way. The ones that are going this way are the ones that are over here. So this would be the focal point. This is your line that's going straight up, and all the other ones are going to match that point right here. All your trees are going to be lining up to point towards right here. And you can also see where the light source is coming from. This is an overcast day, so it's kind of gray, but you can see the highlight right here, which tells you that the light is coming from over here. Because look at where the other highlights are. You see where the brightest parts are? Look for your highlights, because that's going to tell you where the light source is coming from. Okay, we have reached into an even more complicated version of trees with a light source. But here, the light source is in the back coming through. So obviously we're going to have shading right here. So here's what's really interesting about this perspective, where the light is coming from the other side, is we are in the shadows here, which means you would almost be doing the opposite. You're starting with your highlights and then doing your darkest, because this is not the brightest, right? But you wouldn't be able to just paint your darkest spots and then put in this little highlights here, because there's so many of them in the background. This right here, this tree, these shadows, this tree, that is the foreground. So that's going to be what your last layers are in your painting. So the background is the highlights here. So, but don't panic. You literally just do the opposite. Start with your color blocking and get your lightest colors. This is a really, really light blue. So just have a bunch of light blue from about here. Your tree line in the background starts about here. And then you would add your lightest colors that aren't your blue, your lightest colors for your tree. And again, just like how I explained in the first two reference photos, you're just dabbing the lightest colors. And then starting with your lightest, working your way to your darkest, and your darkest is going to be this tree. And so once you get to your darkest, which are these trees, you're not dabbing anymore, you're adding lines. So you've gotten to a point where you've done all your highlights, and now you're in the shading territory. You're going to build up those shades, because the very last layers are going to be the darkest spots. Now there's a couple ways that you can do shadows with painting. You can clearly see the grass here. It's not just black. You can see the images underneath the shadows. What you could do is get black and then adding a lot of acrylic flow release. Acrylic flow release, it's not watering down your paint, because acrylics don't like water. They don't mix well. That wouldn't work. It's like if you had a watercolor and you added water and you got this really, really light color from a dark opaque color because you have added a lot of water. That's what acrylic flow release is. It's the acrylic version of watering down your color. And then you just paint your painting, and then go start at the base of your tree and paint one strip just going down. And that way you have covered, but it's not opaque, and it's going to just be a flat black. It's going to be a light black layered on top, a really, really thin. So we're not whitening the black to make a gray. We're thinning the black. I can show you how to do that. So that's one way of doing that. Or what I think might be a little bit more cumbersome is shading your colors. You've already got your greens mixed up for your grass. Take a bit of them, set it aside, and add your your shading color, which I would recommend a black here, but you would need the tiniest bit of black to shade that green color, and then you would paint this strip. Hey, I want to take a minute to invite you to subscribe to my channel. If you like hearing tips about writing and art, hit that notification icon so you don't miss an episode. Okay, let's get back in it. Okay, I've got my color selection here, ranging from some dark browns, lighter browns, yellow, blues, green, black, and white. Raw umber compared to black, there isn't too much of a difference, but there are undertones in the raw umber that clearly make it look brown instead of black. Let's get started mixing our colors. If you watched my other tutorials, then you know how this is going to go. I've got my ranges of color here, and we're going to be mixing the colors for our trees and the leaves of those trees using what we've got here. For the sake of time, I'm going to speed up the mixing process, but I did want to remind you that adding blue and yellow makes green, and so we're going to make various shades of green for our leaves that I talked about in my reference photos. And I'm also going to be using some of these darker browns with the yellows to make different shades for the bark. Before I go too far with the mixing, I did want to point out that I want these colors to sing. There's a time and a place for colors to clash and not have similar undertones, but for the purpose of this video, I really wanted there to be a unifying color. Now, this is a color that goes underneath and kind of bonds these colors together because they have a similar tinting, excuse me, not a tinting, but a similar undertone. So I will use one of the colors in each of the browns that I mix so that it makes it more unified. This is where you'll see me adding a lot of acrylic flow release. I talked about this during my referencing photos. This is just a bottle that I have, and I just squirt it out as I need it. If I wanted to slow the drying time, I would add retarder. Okay, I did a basic backdrop here. I have the tape to show that I'm going to have two separate ways that I show you how to paint some trees. I have a thin brush here that is kind of wide angled, but it gets really thin at the tip. And I'm just brushing straight up to make some trunks. I'm being intentional with where the root system would be coming up. Here I'm showing you how thin it can get. That way I can show you also the branches as well, because just like I had showed in my references, we get to paint the background of the trees first. You'll see me stop periodically to also swatch the colors. This is a really good tip for keeping track of your colors, so that if you were to run out and you needed to mix more, you already have a swatch that you can match the color to. I'm going in with some highlights here to slowly build up the look of the tree to make it look more realistic. Now, hyperrealism isn't my forte, and that's not what I'm going for here, but there are some things that you can do to make your paintings look realistic, which is why I go over reference photos with you and show you how to analyze what you're looking at, so that you know how to add those little details that create this realism for you. Now, it doesn't matter if you use different styles or techniques,
or if you are doing more abstract or impressionistic, even those styles where you get a little bit more creative with the color and the look, still having those basics is really going to help you be able to make your paintings believable. Here I'm dabbing in with a wide brush. As you can see here, the wide brush with the bristles kind of sticking out help create this illusion that there are a bunch of leaves, even though, again, we haven't gone in and painted every single leaf ourselves. Now, as I'm building up these values, I'm obviously starting with the darkest first and adding to the lightest. We'll eventually get to the highlights, but the angle of your brush also helps dictate to show where your light source is coming from and where your highlights are. In the reference photo, I showed you how it almost looked like there were lines in the trees, only because where the sun was hitting the highlight point obviously created a contrast between where it was still shaded, which gives that lighting effect. Excuse me, I meant to say lining effect, not lighting effect. You can tell from the color swatches that I have colors that range from really dark brown to turquoisey blue and even sage green. The sage green is kind of like a grayish slaty green. I'm going to show you here how to have a highlight with assuming that the light source is coming from behind the trees. I am combining a few of the reference photos together to show you how to do some of the things that were shown in the reference photos. Now, I did just show how I explained to do the shadowing before. I did not mix a totally different color of the green. I simply just lowered the opacity of the black with the acrylic flow release and just made a strip down that gives you the illusion of the shadow. And then I go in with the light source, the beams of light that are coming. Because of the angle of where the sun would be coming through, that's why the beams of light go across the way that they do. They angle down. Depending on how you wanted the sun to be behind the trees, those angles would change ever so slightly to just angle more up and not so much down, but that is basically how that would show. Now, I also showed you how to create those peekaboo spots from the reference photos where they had little spots in the leaves where you could see through. And I just went in and painted over with a color that kind of matched the background. Now here you're seeing where I explain your color blocking with a thick forest. I do have to apologize. I'm having to voice over this section of the video because my mic stopped working and I didn't realize it. So some of my hand gestures may not add up with my words. I added another impromptu color that I wanted to add for the darker bits of green. And I do remember pointing out in the video when I thought I had audio explaining that I should have added this color that I'm adding now first before I had added the spots where you will see the trees poke up the top. In the reference photo, if you remember, what was in the back, the far, far back, was going to be really, really misty looking. It wasn't going to be too detailed because what's closest to you is going to be what's most detailed, and what's in the farther back is going to have this misty, foggy look to it, which is where you get those colors. And I add what is going to be the background tree line from these little spots of the green that come poking up into that shaded bit. Now we're just adding a little bit of black for the bark. And you can see here what is closest to us, the tree is going to go all the way up, and it's going into what would be that shaded bit, but that's not saying that it is the same height. That's just a way to show how it is closer to you, because there's clearly a tree line, but there's also trees that are closest to you, just like that one reference photo that we looked at. You're going to see here how I start building up those colors and start adding some highlights where the light source is going to be coming from. Just like that one reference photo, the light source was coming from the side. So whatever I highlight is going to be coming from the angle that the sun is shining through. And you will see that as I start adding colors. I do a different mixture of angling my brush, and I do some swipes, but I also do dabs to help give different effects. When you look at a tree, it does kind of have a triangle effect. You've got the trunk, and then you've got the branches that go up, and it does give this triangle-y effect. And even if they come out a little bit, we still understand that a tree goes out and then kind of starts to go in as it goes up. And that is why I am angling the brush the way that I am and dabbing the paint the way that I am, to help give that illusion. As you can see here, as I'm dabbing, it's adding a line, a thick line, not a thin line, which is what those branches and the leaves are going to be doing. Don't forget to have fun with it. When I share these tips, they are not rules that you have to follow. They're just things that I have found either through my own studies or in college, or just by doing it myself. I've learned how to do what I'm showing you, but these aren't rules. I want you to have fun with it. These are just helpful tips and tricks that help you get where you want to be going with your artwork. And sometimes it definitely is a trust the process. When I first added these highlights, they were too liney looking, which is why you see me going in with this wider brush, and I just start dabbing, because obviously I needed the highlights there, but I didn't need them to be like a line. Okay, there you have it. There they are in all of their glory.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, please like the video below. Comment what tips you hope I'm going to be doing in the future, or if you have any suggestions or ideas. I have plenty planned, but if anybody makes a recommendation, of course, I'll make a video and I'll share it with you all. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!
I wanted to be with you.
Okay, honey.
Because Dad's being mean to me.
I'm sure he's probably not being mean, and he's just being stern. But if you're going to be in here, please be quiet a moment. I'm making a video, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.